Hey guys, it's us again, here to review Twilight. I'm Jay.
I'm Kate.
Welcome to Red Flags, a Twilight podcast. But yeah, so last time we left off, Bella had finally gotten hit by a car.
We waited like 3 chapters for that to happen.
For something to happen. I feel like that's more it, because I'm like, I don't care that she got hit by a car.
I was specifically waiting for the car.
I just wanted something to happen, and that just happened to be like the first thing that happened.
And then all of a sudden everything's happening now.
Yeah, all
of a sudden. It's like she got hit by a car. Bam.
Really set things into motion.
So the last chapter we talked about ended with the last lines of... And that was the first time I dreamed of Edward Cullen. This chapter is Invitation, by the way, chapter 4. Chapter
4, Invitations. We get to see what her dream about Edward actually entails. And it's not very interesting, if I'm honest.
I don't even remember it.
Yeah, so. That's the thing. She says that she's, like, following Edward, and he's just, like...
his back to her.
Yeah, he's, like, in the periphery, but his skin is glowing for some reason.
That's foreshadowing, if I've never heard it.
I know. She's like, his skin was glowing. And I'm like, girl...
There's no way you could have, like...
Right? It's just
how do you predict that?
That's a weird thing.
I hate Bella.
I'm
sorry. I've said this so many times while we were reading. We read it together, so like we'll take turns reading chapters to each other.
And one thing I'll say about the 3 chapters in general, because the overview of the 3 chapters is we finally meet Jacob, and that's like the big thing that happens. But the overview of the 3 chapters is the first 2 chapters involve Bella and Edward, and they were hilarious. We just had a time with them because Edward is so extra, so confusing, and so just like, I don't know, melodramatic.
He's mood swingy because he is like, one second he's like, Bella, you know I'm not good for you, but I don't care, and then the next he's like, what's wrong with you? You know I'm not good. Like
he's just
and she's
so,
like, I literally know nothing about you still.
So,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah, so we had a real fun time reading those because they were really
so much.
We had a real time reading both of those chapters because I think that they were very easy to make fun of, specifically because of Edward. And then we get to the 3rd chapter, which has Jacob in it and no Edward. And it was just a normal chapter. It was just like, all right, we got from point A to point B somehow, boys.
Bella is awful, by the way, for the way she treats Jacob, but we'll talk about that later.
Yes. But so we start off with chapter 4, Invitations, and the first thing we get is the continuation of Bella talking about the dream about Edward. And it's nothing.
It's boring.
It's just nothing at all. She's like, he was turning away from me and his skin was glowing.
Turning away from me. Maybe I'm dreaming of this because he's been ignoring me for 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks. This boy
Why
has
are
been
you still
ignoring
so
you.
obsessed with him? He's treated you like crap for 6 weeks.
And yet she's like, but he turned away in the dream. And I woke up and I was too upset to go back to sleep. Grow up, Bella.
She's got some problems. She doesn't even know this dude. She's had literally like 2 conversations with him. Me, or any other normal person, would have 2 conversations with this guy and just be like, oh, he's clearly not interested. Okay, let me move on and date Mike, who is a normal person. Mike or Tyler or Eric, who are all very nice to me and are normal people that you can have a normal relationship with where you don't have to worry about being drained dry or their weird mood swing.
Or having weird random dreams about them.
Even weird random dreams. You want to have weird random dreams? Go for it, girl. But like, Edward is not worth it.
True. But so we get to the next day after this horrific dream of hers where Edward ignores her for 2 seconds.
Horrific. I mean, it's been her real life, so why is it so awful?
Exactly.
And you don't know him, so who cares?
But she gets to school and immediately something is up because guess what? Sadie Hawkins' dance is coming up. And she has a feeling, she's like, Mike's acting really sketchy, even though Jessica called me and told me that she was going to be asking him to the dance. But he's acting weird. I wonder why.
And then Jessica's acting really weird because Mike didn't say yes, but he also didn't say no. He said maybe, which to me, I'm like, Jessica, girl, you can do better.
Take the hint.
Like, the moment I ask a guy to do something and they're like, maybe, I call them out on it and I'm like, never mind, I don't want to anymore. I'm all set. If you can't, like, commit to this with me, like, I'm all set. And next thing you want me to do, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. We'll see. Yeah. But Jessica, I guess, is acting weird because she's not entirely sure. And Mike is acting very weird. And Bella's like, guess it's nothing. While she's in the...
Well, I think she says, oh no, I think Mike told her no. And then, like, at lunch, Jessica and Mike are sitting as far away from each other at their lunch table as possible because this is high school where you only have like 4 people to sit with.
And she's like, oh no. She just finds it very weird that Jessica's acting weird and Mike is acting weird.
She knows that Mike didn't say yes, but she doesn't know exactly why. Because she's kind of oblivious.
Even though he sits, at one point it says that he sits at the end of her biology table every day and aggressively ignores Edward. And it's like, girl, how did you not pick up on that?
Well, I mean, she calls him a Labrador retriever.
A golden retriever, yeah.
So yeah, Mike didn't say yes to Jessica. She finds out in bio when Mike
strolls in and he's like, well, Jessica asked me to the dance. She's like, that's great. And he's like, well,
he didn't like her answer. Like, she said that as soon as she was like really sportive, like, oh, that's awesome, I'm so happy for you guys, you're gonna have so much fun. Like, his face fell and he's like, oh, like, you're not jealous.
And he goes, I was hoping that you would ask and I didn't know if you wanted to ask me, so I said maybe to Jessica right now.
And then Bella just looks at him and goes, you should tell Jessica yes, Mike. Having her wait is rude. And he's like, oh, okay. And
it's just like
back.
It's just like the lamest way to ask somebody to a dance possible. It's like, you know that it's a girl's choice dance, and instead of being like, oh, I'm gonna wait and see, and like the girl who asked me is the girl who wants to go with me because they're friends, and if one of them asked me, they would probably know about it. Like, all of them would probably know about it because girls talk to each other.
And even if, like, okay, so maybe she's shy, because, like, Bella's not the type to ask a guy to a dance anyway. So maybe she's shy. It's okay to ask her to a dance. Like,
lame way to do it.
Even if it's ladies' choice, just be like, hey, like, I know it's ladies' choice, but I would really like to go with you. That's fine. But, like, to be like, so one of your friends asked me, and I told her maybe because I prefer you. Like, automatically saying that every time, if there are any guys listening to this, every single time, that will make a girl, if she's a good friend, say no.
Because it's just like, you know this girl and you're friends with her as far as I can tell, but I'm gonna hold out hope that maybe you want to go with me, even though she already asked me and explicitly expressed interest.
Bad enough to stab your friend, one of your only friends here, your first friend here, in the back.
Exactly. And I'm like, Mike, come on, bud.
Like, first off, Mike, she doesn't find you interesting enough because you don't have crazy mood swings and, like, ignore her. Save her life and then ignore her for 6 months. So, but not in the cards for you, buddy.
No. And so she turns down Mike. He's dejected. Right after this exchange, she notices that Edward is looking at her. She just stares back at him during class, even though they're both supposed to be paying attention. And they just have a moment where they stare at each other, even though he's not talking to her and she's mad at him.
And it's like a really, like, so the way it's described, I think it's supposed to be like a really electric, like, we made eye contact and like it was electric and intense and interesting. And the only feeling I got from it was, this is really uncomfortable.
Exactly. And like the teacher kind of calls them out in the way that I would have liked to call them out, because he's like, Edward, what's the answer to this question? Of course Edward knows. He reads the guy's mind or whatever, and he's like, oh, I don't know what he says.
Square root of 100 is like 12, right?
In biology he says that.
Well, anyway.
No. He says the Krebs cycle.
He did.
And she's like, oh my god, he's so smart.
And then they stop staring at each other. And then she kind of confronts him and is like, are you done ignoring me for weeks and weeks and whatever? Like, hi, Edward, I'm Bella. Do you remember me?
He's like, it's not good for us to be friends. Like, you have to believe me that, like, it's better this way. And she's like, all right, douche.
So he's just like, we can't be friends.
But she goes to leave in a huff. And
drops all of her
stuff. She just wrecks shop in the doorway to the hall. She's just like, oh.
The best part is when she's like, I thought about leaving it. And that's hilarious because that's something I would do. Like making a dramatic exit, dropping all of my crap and being like, I've come too far. I just have to leave now. I gotta follow through. It doesn't matter. Cut my losses. I'll buy new books.
And she's considering this. She's like, well, I have to pick them up because I want to be a good student. She goes to pick them up and Edward's there. He's picking up her books for her. He's like, oh, you dropped something.
Because in the last chapter, he was like, oh no, I have to make her think I'm human. But because she was skeptical, in this chapter, he's like, forget it. I'll just use my super speed, stack all these books, get over to her before humanly possible.
Like, let's just keep her guessing. I want to do it for dramatic effect a little bit. Time to drop the facade.
Let me just mess with this chick.
Yeah. He's like, I want to play some mind games, actually. It's been 100 years. I'm feeling kind of bored. Like, what's going on in your mind, Edward, that you're like, you know what the best course of action, now that I know that this girl is suspicious of me and my entire family, I'm gonna prove her right. I'm gonna do it. So he picks up her stuff for her at lightning speed, and she is like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, listen, we just can't be friends, and I'm sorry about that, but like, that's how it's gotta be. She's like,
okay, then just don't be my friend, just don't talk to me.
She's like, this dude is weird, but she goes on her merry way.
But she's still obsessed. Yeah, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, she's obsessed. She's like, he's weird, but in a hot way. So she goes through.
All I can think of is, I want a lady in the street, but a freak in the bed. Basically. That's Edward, except like, so very different, I guess.
A freak in the streets and a different kind of freak in the bed. But she goes on her merry way. She's a little bit peeved, but she's like, I'm not gonna let that dude bring me down.
So she goes into the hall. And
Mike is okay-ish. And
Mike is like weird, kind of.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say he's cold towards her, but he's definitely not Mike.
He's definitely dejected. She meets up with Eric and she's like, oh, weird, right? That Mike asked me to the dance. She doesn't say that to him. She's thinking about it. And then Eric's like, hey, do you want to go to the dance with me?
Isn't it a lady's choice? And he's like, well, yeah, but, and she's like, sorry, Eric, I'm going out of town. And he's like, oh.
Okay.
Yeah, all right then.
And then she like goes through the rest of the day. She's like, it's a nightmare because these boys want me and I don't want them. I just want Edward in my dreams. And
what a hard life having two guys so far want you.
Yeah, exactly.
You know how many people wanted me in high school? 0.
Big nil.
0.
Yeah,
and we're not ugly. I'm just saying that. We're not ugly people.
Oh my
We're
God.
fine looking. We just, I guess we don't have what Bella Swan has.
But she goes through the rest of her day and she's like, this is the nightmare scenario. But she goes out to her car after school. She's like, I just want this day to be done. I hit somebody in the face with a volleyball and I need to leave. Like, I need to skedaddle.
It's been a bad day for Bella.
But as she's leaving, Edward Cullen cuts her off and she's like, I just want to hit it. She has some road rage going on.
All of a sudden, like, I don't know what it is about Edward. He brings out the aggression in her because from this point on, between this chapter and the next chapter, after her initial thought of, what if I just hit him hard enough to really mess up the paint on his car? Just the paint. From that on, she's like tempted to destroy his car with her truck.
She just like constantly, she's like, what if I just rolled into him right now?
I think in the next chapter too, she's like, what if I hit him? And then she's like, this surprised me as I'm not a violent person. And I'm like, bet.
Girl, your thoughts say
because you're
otherwise.
acting pretty violent.
But she's like so mad that he's blocking her way.
Which isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's not really that big of a deal because she doesn't really have a reason to be mad at him at this point because she doesn't even know why he's like cutting her off. He's just in front of her in a parking lot. And she's like, I hate that Edward is here. Like, she's so mad.
So, like, the best part is he cuts her off in the parking lot, which in itself is pretty funny. Only to hold up an entire line of cars behind her because he has to stop in front of the cafeteria to pick up his siblings, who are still pretty far away and have to take time to walk. So cars like behind her are beeping. She is fuming, ready to just take this kid's like bumper right off the car. She's so mad. And then all of a sudden there's a knock on her window, her her passenger side window. And it's Tyler, the kid that almost killed her with his van.
He now has a Nissan Sentra, just so we're clear.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, she makes note of that. She's like, he has his little new Sentra going on. And I'm like, girl, how do you know every make and model of every car in existence, despite the fact that you said you weren't a car person?
He taps on her window, her passenger side window. She leans over and it says I tried to pull the window down, which is really weird. I'm just picturing this girl jamming her fingers in between like the car jam in the window and like prying it down. And I think what she means is like the car is so old that it has the old classic like roll down, like, you know, when people say you have to roll the windows down. Like, I think it's one of those cars. She can only get the window down halfway because it's so rusted and creaky and old. And then Tyler's like, do you want to ask me to the dance?
And she's like, no, I'm going to Seattle. And he goes, oh yeah, Mike said that. Like, he knows that she's going to Seattle. And he's like, I was just hoping you were letting him down easy. And she's like, no, I'm going to Seattle. Now it's decided. I'm going to Seattle.
And in her mind, the best part is in her mind, he's like, oh, do you want to ask me to the dance? And she automatically is like, no, I'm going to Seattle. Snaps at him and then immediately feels bad and is like, I'm sorry. And then he's like, oh yeah, no, Mike said that. And she's like, then why did you ask me if Mike told you?
And she's not sorry anymore. She's like, it is his fault,
yeah,
actually.
She's like, yeah, it's his bad. Like, forget this Tyler kid. You almost killed me, strike one. Asking me out, strike two.
And that's it. And then she watches him walk away, like all dejected. Then she looks forward, and it looks like Edward is just up in his car laughing his head off. He is having the time of his life as his siblings get into his car. And she's like, I hate Edward Cullen.
Even though, like, realistically, how would he have heard you? So it's like a weird thing for her to automatically be like, he heard every word, because realistically, people can't. Like, we know that Edward can because we read it before, but like at this moment she has no reason to assume that he could.
It has anything to do with anything that just happened. So she goes home. She's still fuming. And she asks Charlie, her dad, she's like, oh, can I go to Seattle this weekend? And he's like, or the next weekend or whatever. And he's like, isn't that the weekend of the Sadie Hawkins dance, girl? And she's like, I don't want to go to that, Dad. I'm a bad dancer. And he's like, oh, makes sense. You get it from me. I'm like, you're a police officer. Don't you have to have coordination, sir?
Coordination and dancing are different sometimes.
I don't know, man. But she's like, oh, I got my coordination from my dad, and like Renee knows how to dance and do all these things, and I'm clumsy.
Renee is so much better than Charlie. Yeah. Basically, that's what she's saying the whole time. Basically.
But she's like, I'm clumsy because my dad is clumsy. And I'm like, your dad has a loaded firearm at his hip constantly, and he's clumsy.
Which is another thing I feel like we need to mention. So in chapter 1, we forgot to mention this, but she talks about how like when he came home from work as a police officer, he would take his belt off and he would take the gun out of the holster. And she said that when she lived with him and she was little, he used to take the clip out of it. But now that she's older, he just leaves it in. And she makes this comment of like how he must think that I'm old enough to know better and not depressed enough to pick it up and pull the trigger. And that was just like a big whoa.
Like Bella. But she's really pissed at her dad because he knows about the Sadie Hawkins dance, and she's like, Dad, I'm not going to that. I'm going to Seattle. I want to go to a bookstore and read Wuthering Heights or whatever. And
I'm like, they don't have that in the library.
Right. It's a classic.
Because I know they do. Like, they must.
Right. And he's like, yeah, I guess you can go. I mean, the truck's kind of weird, but if you think you can make it. And she's like, it's fine. It's fine.
He's first really concerned and is like, maybe I should drive you. Like, I should drive you. I don't think the truck will make it there. And then she's finally like, I'm just gonna go clothes shopping and be in dressing rooms all day. And he's like, you know what? Take your chances with the old crappy truck.
Like, he's like, it's fine. Just go. I don't care anymore.
Which, how far is Seattle from their town?
I don't know. I think it's about an hour because I think in the first chapter she said something about how like she goes to the airport and then they have to drive an hour back south to Forks.
So they're making this big fuss over her driving literally an hour.
Mm-hmm. It's like, girl,
she's 17 years
you're
old.
17.
It is an hour. I wouldn't have even asked my parents permission for that at 17, honestly. I got my license, and it turned from, like, you know, when you're 15 and you're like, Mom, Dad, can you drive me to my friend's house, to, like, 16 being like, hey, I'm leaving. I'm going to Jay's. Yeah. Peace. I'll be back.
I have a job. I have a driver's license. The world is my oyster, and I'm leaving.
And if we went far, it was just, I'll text you when I get there. And then I would forget. And my parents were like,
to that point,
maybe they're alive, maybe they're not. I'm sure they're fine.
Who knows? But to that point, too, she reminds him that she's like, hey, I've spent the last at least 12 years in Phoenix. So I think I'm good. Like, I was in a big city before, and now I'm going to a big city that's an hour away from here, which is a small town. So, like, I think I'm good, Charlie, actually.
Which
and
we
he's
know
like,
from later that, like, she almost
she's
gets
not.
mugged and she's not good. But, like, we'll leave that alone for
in theory, that does make sense. Like, all of Bella's arguments, in theory, are sound arguments, except that she's Bella. She gets the okay to go to Seattle. She's like, all right, sweet, I'm gonna go to Seattle. I'm gonna pick out the book. And we forgot to mention a little bit that this is, like, the part.
That night, right after dinner with Charlie, she gets a phone, or while she's making dinner for Charlie, she gets a phone call from Jess saying that Mike caught up with her after school and asked her.
I feel like her friends are only there as like a conversation, like a conversation piece of like things going on in her life, and she's like, I have to be the chess player in this game, setting my friends up, the pawns that they are.
That's one thing that I don't like that Stephanie Meyer did. She made all of Bella's friends, obviously any characters, not any, but most characters to the main, like, I don't know, in relation to the main character, they're supporting. They're there to support whatever's going on in the main character's life. In this case, I don't think Stephanie Meyer did a really good job with Bella's friend group at all.
Well, it's one of those things where, like, I don't know, I feel like this could have been done so much better, and I'm sure we can like find specific examples as we get into it a little bit later when we hear Edward's actual opinions on humanity. But Edward has such like a negative opinion on humanity. He's like, everybody is so vapid and vain and short-lived and none of them even matter, but you're different. And I feel like Bella as a character would have been so much better if she wasn't like, oh yeah, like I am different and that's why we're meant to be together. If she's like, no, you're wrong. Humanity has a lot to offer and I'm just part of it.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm exactly the same. The difference is you can't hear my every thought.
Yeah, and like that's the reason you find humanity so boring. It's not actually.
Bella's worse than all of her friends.
So I feel like I promised not to talk about Midnight Sun so much, but in Midnight Sun, when like the original draft, not the draft that's like coming out, that's gonna be like an actual book, he mentions something to that effect where he's like, I can hear everybody's thoughts and they're all so vain and judgmental and blah blah blah, I just hate them all. And I'm like, dude, you're judging people right now. You're the one who's being judgmental because all of these people are living in their own private worlds as people do, and you're like, hey, I'm just gonna invade everybody's privacy and blame them for it. Like, Edward, I have such an issue with him in Midnight Sun.
And it's also like my thoughts are private, and I can honestly, it's very common for people to have a thought that's not super nice and then be like, but I'm not gonna act on it.
Right, like
I'm choosing not to say it out loud. Exactly. I'm choosing not to act on it, and that's the whole point.
Yeah, like, it's like bad thoughts don't equal bad people. Bad actions equal bad people. And Edward is confusing the two. And I feel like Bella as a character would have been really strong if she had pushed back on that even slightly. And as far as I remember, she just doesn't at all. She's just like, yeah, I
want to be a vampire.
Yeah, I want to be a vampire and I'm a mystery to you. So I guess that inherently makes me better. Weird. Like, I don't know.
In reality, Bella's worse. Bella judges people more than anyone else. We even see it when, like,
I'm like, that's their biggest trait in common so far, is that Edward and Bella are both incredibly judgmental.
Like, even, so I won't get into this too much because we're not quite there yet, but when she meets Jacob, Jacob is arguably, right now, the best character in this entire book. Jacob and Charlie. She judges both of them, and it's just like, they
don't deserve it.
Bella's worse.
Yes, they don't deserve it
Bella
at
is
all.
exactly the same as everyone else, so I hate that they're trying to make it like...
She's so different, because she is
I hate
sarcastic
that in general,
or something.
when guys are like, oh, you're different from other girls, and I'm like, what's that even supposed to mean? What are other girls like? Like, what do you mean by that? Because a lot of times they mean it like, oh, you're not like... It's like when guys call girls crazy, and I'm like, okay, so what did you do to make her act like that?
Exactly. It's like, I'm not like other girls. Like, is that supposed to be a compliment to me? You're just like, it's like when guys say that, it's just like saying, well, you're cute for a girl kind of thing. Like, it's a backhanded compliment where it's like, I'm supposed to think that's flattering because even though you find inherently that there's something wrong with my gender, I'm okay because I'm not meeting those stereotypes. I'm okay because you can't immediately see that.
Yeah,
in
like,
me.
tell me what other girls are like because I would love to be like like that, so I don't attract assholes like you anymore.
Exactly. Anyways.
And that's Edward and Bella in a nutshell.
She goes back to school the next day and drops her keys in some water because she's so clumsy. And
which I hate. It's annoying. It's not endearing. It's annoying.
Right. It's just like,
it's overplayed in this book. Like,
yes.
I've read things where there are characters that are clumsy. I don't know. I feel like most people that are like, oh, I'm such a klutz. Like, they're not really super clumsy. We have clumsy moments. Maybe you're like me and you're short enough that your hips are just the perfect height to collide with whatever counter space surface or tabletop there is, because I have a lot of bruises because of that. But it's not like, no one is so clumsy that they're falling all over themselves all the time. Can't hit a volleyball to save their lives at all, ever. Mm-hmm. Like, can't do anything. Mm-hmm. Bella is helpless, and it's frustrating to me because usually when girls are like, oh, I'm such a klutz, that's not
actually true.
And it's not that extreme, like, but it's being pathetic. Yeah. Like, I hate to say that, but it is. And it's just like, I don't know about you guys, but I learned to walk at 1. So, like, why can't you do it yet?
Right. And it's just
all I'm thinking.
It's just very aggravating. But she drops her keys into this puddle, and before she can pick them up, oh, who's that? It's Edward again. And he's like, let me get those for you. And she's like, okay. Cool, thanks, bye. He's like, no. Actually, I've changed my mind. So that means you've changed your mind as well, and we're gonna be friends now. He is basically like, listen, I want to be friends with you now, actually. She's like, what do you mean? And he's like, I'm not totally sure, but I think we're gonna give it a go, don't you? And she's like, I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about that.
I don't know what you're like, what's wrong with you? I think in this chapter, she actually looks at him and says, do you have split personalities or something? Like, you hated my guts yesterday. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, let's be friends.
And he's like, there's like a point where it's like, he looked at me from beneath his dark lashes.
And all I'm picturing is this guy, like, eyes twitching, like, looking down, but, like, squinting up. Like,
it's just not
so bad.
Every action that he performs in this book, the way I feel like it is like a guy who thinks he's all that, but in reality, he's just, like, doing really weird stuff.
It's like, have you seen those memes where it's like expectation, reality?
Versus reality.
Edward is the reality picture.
And
oh, I hate him. I hate him.
But he's like, no, I think we should be friends now, actually. She's like, I'm gonna go to class now because you're being weird. And he's like, no, you got me all wrong. I'm not gonna take no for an answer.
You got me wrong. I'm crazy.
Weird. And she's like, okay, I guess. And that's the end of that chapter. That's the end of invitations. And then we get to the next chapter, blood type. Chapter 5. She goes through her day and she's like, that was really weird this morning. Like, I don't really know what was up with that. She gets to lunch. And then Jessica's like, hey,
Edward Cullen is staring at you.
And she's like, oh my god, is he? After she's like sick because he's not there.
Which is weird. You don't know this boy and his lack of presence. He's been horrible to you. And he not being present makes you so sick that you don't want to eat. Get over yourself, Bella. You don't even know this boy. You are pathetic. I would hate to see what you looked like in college.
And it's one of those things too where like she sees that he's not at his usual table, and despite being so observant that she picks up on his eye color, she picks up on, oh, you weren't there, she picks up on everything about this boy, and yet she doesn't see him at his table, and she's like, oh my god, he's not here, despite the fact he's just sitting alone somewhere.
Surprised she didn't like jump up on a table to scope out where he was.
I know. But she gets herself a lemonade, and Jessica's like, oh yeah, Edward Cullen's looking at you, haha.
And she's like, what?
Oh my god. And she looks over, and the description of Edward beckoning her to his table.
We were enacting this on our couch, and I encourage you to read this passage and enact it out with a friend.
Because it's just like,
oh my gosh.
It's like he looks at her with a crooked smile.
And all I can think of is like the scarecrow, like half like.
Yeah, just like half.
Like, you know, in cartoons where characters are forced to smile, and they're like, smile, and like you can hear their face breaking as they're trying to smile, and only one side. It's like one side.
It's just so awkward. And then he's like beckoning her with just one finger.
He's like, come here, girl.
Yeah, basically. And then it says he winks, and I'm like, who is this clown?
He's just like smiling. Come on over. Come over. Winking over and over, wagging his finger around in the middle of a lunchroom while he's sitting at a table by himself.
And Bella goes, that's hot, actually.
I was just like, ooh, Let me go get my man.
Bye,
Jess. I'm gonna forget about all of my friends right now. This is the moment that she's like, friends, schmens, they'll get over me. But they don't. So she goes over, sits with Edward, and she's like, so what do you want? And he's like, nothing.
And this is where in my notes I wrote down, he's, quote, done being good, as if he's getting off of a low-calorie diet and not dooming an entire person. Like, it's just insane to me that he's just like, you know what? I'm over it.
He's like, so you know what? I know I told you I was bad for you, but I've decided I don't care. Do you care? You know what? It doesn't matter because you literally have no choice in any decisions that I'm going to make that involve you. I'm just gonna remove you as a variable for decision making. Is that cool? Like, I think we're good with that.
And she's like, basically, yeah. She's like, cool. And she's like, so, like, what's up with you, though? Because you're really weird. Like, you're really fast. Like, there's something going on.
She literally looks at him and goes, like, the one question you should not ask people, what are you?
Yeah. And he's like, I mean, what, do you have any guesses? And she's like, well, did you get bitten by a radioactive spider? Like he's Peter Parker. He's
over here like, girl, I'm not Spider-Man. Like, what's wrong?
He's like, I'm the villain, not the hero. And she's like, oh my god. Oh my god. She's like, oh my god, that's
And
cool.
then he's like, are you afraid? And she's like, She's like, but I've decided that even though it's better for me to stay away, I'm not going to. And you don't get a choice. That cool? And she's just like, Edward, take me on this lunch table right now.
She's like, come on, dude, it's fine. And she, like, they have this whole weird conversation where he just keeps asking her what she's thinking.
It's such a
and he
bad,
just
like a poorly written conversation. It's so uncomfortable.
Well, it's just like very weird because it's like, oh, he's used to reading people's minds, so he's just constantly asking her what she's thinking. But the way he asks it is so weird because
Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, she'll be like sitting there, she's like playing with her little like lemonade tab or whatever, and he's like, so what's on your mind right now? How do you feel about that? What are you thinking?
It's not like, you know, like when you're on a date and you're laying under the stars and they're just like, tell me what's on your mind. Tell me what you're thinking. He's like,
what's going on in that
hair.
dome?
What are you thinking? You twirled your bottle cap. What are you thinking? You looked at me. What's in your head? He's so creepy.
Like, he's just too much.
I thought Edward was so awesome when I was in middle school and I read this. I was Team Edward all the way, and looking back at this, I'm like, he is creepy. There are red flags upon red flags that are putting bigger red flags into the ground, like golf course size. Flags, red flags.
And Bella's just walking around like, oh my god, that's a pretty flag.
Is that blue? I'm colorblind. I don't know.
Is it white? Like, what's going on? But she's just like, it's too much.
It's really hard to read. I'm not gonna
part
lie.
of it too is like him assuming that he's so good at reading people because he can read minds, and then he can't read hers, and he's like, oh my god, how do humans even like function without mind reading? He's like, I have no idea what's going on in this girl's head. She could be thinking about nothing right now,
this is what
and
happens.
I'd have no idea.
17 years of humanity versus 100 years.
He just like knows nothing.
Yeah.
And
he's so dumb. I hate them.
He's a real.
I hate them both so much.
I'm like, Edward's a himbo, honestly.
But, like Thor.
Yes, like Thor.
Except Thor's hot and Edward's creepy.
Listen, Robert Pattinson, not bad.
He's okay.
But she's like, so their conversation amounts to like her asking him a bunch of questions, him answering 0 of them, and him asking her a few questions, and she answers.
And demanding she answer.
Yeah, and she answers them, and then, you know, the bell rings, and she's like, oh, are you coming to biology? And he's like, no, I'm skipping today because sometimes it's good for you to skip class. Bella, are you skipping too? And she's like, actually, I want to pass biology and I care about my future, so bye.
So third conversation they've had. First one, the only reason he saved her life was so her blood wouldn't splatter all over the parking lot.
And he wouldn't
have to sit there licking it off the pavement while everyone watches because he has no control.
Like a stray dog.
Second one was non-existent because he's been ignoring her for 6 weeks. And now third conversation they've ever had. First real decent okay conversation they've ever had. He's like, I'm gonna be a bad influence already. You should skip class. And I'm like, this boy is not good for you, Bella.
It's like, Edward, just because you've gone through high school thousands of times does not mean that you can deprive a young woman of her education.
I mean, like, I know she's either gonna end up dead or a vampire, but give her the option. Like,
right? He's just like, let me just wreck you already. But she goes to biology and she quickly realizes that, in fact, they are testing their blood types in biology. And she's like, oh, that's cool, until she sees Mike get his finger pricked. And she's like,
the professor. So the professor is just like, so this is what you do. Without saying anything to Mike, just grabs his finger, stabs it, like, with this pin. And I'm just like, doesn't he need, like, a written form of, like, consent for that? This teacher, without warning, like, wasn't even like, Mike, can I use you as an example? Just grabbed Mike's hand, stabbed it. Like,
he's like, I gotta get my aggression out somehow. But he stabs Mike's finger, and Mike is like, okay. And the way it describes, like, the testing paper that Mike is using, he holds it up, and it's dripping. Like, he bled Mike dry in this scenario.
Like, is there an artery in your finger I did not know about?
Like, what's going on, Mike? There's an issue going on. Are you, like, what's up?
Hemophiliac.
Yeah.
Could be.
Maybe.
Like the Romanovs. Sickle cell.
So Bella sees this and she's like, oh no, I feel horrible.
I would just like to say, the girl that eventually wants to become a vampire and suck blood for a living passes out at the sight of blood.
She's like, oh my god, she lies to the teacher. She's like, I already know my blood type, it's fine. And he's like, are you okay? And she's like, no.
She makes a comment. He's like, do you need to go to the nurse? And she's like, yeah. And in her head, she's like, dear God, let me leave. I will crawl if I have to. Let me out.
And then Mike's like, I'll do it. And she's like, of course Mike would say that. And it's like, yeah, Bella, he's your friend.
I also don't like the fact that, like, she can't walk straight. She can't take care of herself for crap. And now she can't stand the sight of blood. Like, Bella's just overall a very, not even as far as women go, as far as anything, she's just a very, very weak character. Like, she's that character whenever they're like, she's the kid in the basketball team when they're like, all right, we got to give Becky a chance because her dad paid, like, the same money as everyone else to be on this recreational team. So we gotta put her in and let her play ball.
She can't be a bench warmer.
Daddy funds this, so we gotta put her in. That is Bella. And I hate characters like that. It's very annoying to me, like the fact that she literally can't do anything without the support of some dude. And she's just like a weak little baby, and I hate it. Like, I don't like the way she's portraying women overall so far in this book.
Not great.
As Bella is very weak. All of her friends are catty. Like, the stereotypical of, like, when you're a kid and they're like, oh, well, you know, you can't have more than 3 girls in a room because, like, there's gonna be a cat fight. Like,
that's how they are.
I hate that. I hate that they're portrayed that way. It's so annoying to me.
Because it's just like, yeah, high school girls can be dramatic because it's a lot of, like, hormones going on. The same way that high school guys can be dramatic because everybody who's a teenager is just a mess,
yeah, but
frankly.
somehow no books ever talk about that.
No books ever talk about guys being unruly, even though it's like a whole boys will be boys situation when they act just like fools. Anyways.
It's so annoying to me. And it's annoying that Bella literally can't do anything for herself. It's really frustrating.
But
she thinks she's the adult.
Yeah, she's like, I'm the most responsible one here. I'm the most capable one here.
Really? What if someone needed stitches? Could you drive them? I guess you're not that responsible and
Could you
capable,
drive
are
them?
you?
Could you give them sutures? Like, what's going on, girl? But Mike is like, I'll take her to the nurse's office, and Mr. Banner's like, all right, get her out of here.
Get that girl gone.
Yeah. And so Mike starts walking her to the nurse's office, and when
half dragging her because, like,
Yeah.
she can't even walk.
She's stumbling. She's like your drunk friend, like your friend that got too drunk at the bar on her 21st birthday.
I mean, she's like, always like that. Like, is Bella always just messed up?
Like, Bella would be that girl at the bar that's like, oh my god, that's like Timmy. I knew him in high school and he hated me, and I had a crush on him, but like I hate him now. And then like 5 vodka shots in, she's like, oh my god,
push my boobs up. Hey Tim, how
like
are you?
5 vodka shots in, she's like, oh my god, he could burp the alphabet. I love him. Like, it's just, she's a mess. She's that kind of girl.
I hate her so much.
But so Mike is like dragging her to the nurse's office, and halfway there she's just like, I just need to sit down on the sidewalk right here. And he's like, okay. He doesn't think anything of it when she like puts her she puts her face against the pavement, and she's like, it's so cool because it's raining out.
Can't do that anymore.
No.
COVID.
And then all of a sudden she hears a voice. She's like, oh god, no, because somebody's like, Bella, are you okay?
And automatically she's like, I would know that voice from anywhere. And I'm like, you've had 2 conversations with them. I think you're obsessed. This isn't healthy.
I think this is a problem.
She even acknowledges at one point that this isn't healthy. And I'm like, you should follow your gut for real.
But Edward comes over, and even though this whole time, like, I know the whole point is that, like, her blood in particular is irresistible to him, but, like, they make such a big deal out of the fact that, like, bleeding humans would be the worst thing. He skips the blood type class specifically for that reason. Because
I think
it's gonna
he skips it because Bella's there, though.
Well, I don't know, because he, like...
Also,
I
because
feel
if
like...
they prick his finger, I don't think he bleeds.
I don't know. But it's one of those things where it's like, they made a big point of it at several occasions where it's like, there's a human bleeding, so it's a big problem for at least one of us. And sometimes that's Edward, but usually when it's just Bella, and I understand that. But it's just like, he walks up, Mike is like bleeding from the hand profusely, apparently, and he's just like, Bella, are you okay? Like, he doesn't even care.
Well, Mike isn't a snack, so...
I mean, depends on how you're looking at it.
Bella doesn't seem to think so.
No. To me, that makes, like, very little sense because it's just like, oh, her scent is just so alluring that I can't resist it. And it's like, listen, I like the smell of cake, but I'm not gonna go ham every time I see it in a grocery store.
I do.
I don't know. It's just very weird to me that he's just like, oh, okay, Mike's bleeding. I don't care. But he shows up, and Mike very nonchalantly is like, I think Bella passed out. And Edward's like, oh, okay. And he just scoops her up. He's like, I'll take her to the nurse.
And Mike is like, no, it's my job. I'm supposed to do it. And Edward's like already walking away. Too bad.
Yeah. He's like, this is my prey, actually, so don't even think about stepping up to it.
This is my human.
Mm-hmm. And so he takes her to the nurse, and she's like, dude, like, what are you doing? You're carrying me like I'm like a stuffed animal right now. And he's like, it's fine. I'm just taking you to the nurse. And she goes to the nurse. The nurse is like, oh my gosh, there's one every year who's like passes out at the sight of blood. I'm like, what kind of people go to this school that at least once a year somebody's like going to the nurse?
Not to be that person and not to make my school sound cruel.
We dissected cats.
And it was awesome. Mm-hmm. And everyone in my class thought it was awesome. We had one girl ask if she could boil the head to keep the skull.
Mm-hmm.
Our teacher said no. But like, we dissected cats.
And everyone was
and
cool.
Bella, like, in their school, there's one person every year that's like, I can't with the blood. Mm-hmm. We dissected cats. We dissected squids and wrote with the ink.
Like, I guess it would be fine if it was...
frogs.
Yeah, like, it would be fine if it was just like, oh, Bella's, like, not okay with blood. Even though, like, her as a character, I feel like that makes her too weak, as we discussed. But, like, if it's just one person and it's like, oh, this one person can't handle blood, so that's an issue. But it's just like, there's one every year. And I'm like, what kind of school?
They go to a very small school, too.
But Edward takes her to the nurse. She's, like, laying there for a second. She's like, I feel better. I feel pretty much better by now. And then Mike carries in another person, Lee, who is also, like, bleeding and can't handle it. And Edward's just like, I guess let's just go. Like, he's fine with it again. And Bella's like, oh my god, I can't handle it. Like, she is worse around it than he is.
She's like, it smells like rust and salt. And I'm like, you pass out at the scent of rust and salt.
Right? Like,
that's not a big deal. Because she's like, it's not the sight, it's the smell. It's like rust and salt.
And Edward points it out.
Rust? I mean, it's not a great smell, but it's fine.
But Edward even points it out. He's like, humans, like, I think he says this too. He's like, humans can't smell blood, giving himself away entirely once again. But he's just like, you can't smell blood. And she's like, I can actually. Like, she's just so petulant about it.
I'm not gonna lie, I've never smelled blood. Like, I've never... Like, Mike was across the room from her. Mm-hmm. Have you ever smelled blood from across the room?
I can understand, like, too, if she was just like, oh, like, I don't know, like, when you floss your teeth and every once in a while you hit it wrong and you're just like, oh, I'm bleeding now. And you can kind of smell it through the taste. If she was, like, saying something along those lines.
It's like some things, you know how they smell based off of how they taste, and other things, like, the scents that you can taste. Like... Yeah.
So it's like one of those things. But anyway.
My sister-in-law can't smell. So she likes really, really spicy food because it affects her taste.
Yes.
Fun fact.
But Edward basically is like, let's just go. I'll drive you home. And Bella's like, no. But he goes up, he's like, I'm gonna go up to the reception, I guess the secretary of the school. I'm gonna go up to the secretary of the school and I'm gonna flirt with her a little bit, and she's gonna be like, oh
Which
my
is
god,
so inappropriate
a
'cause he's
17-year-old. Oh my god, huh, you can do whatever you want.
You can do whatever you want on this desk in this office if you really want. What?
But so he takes Bella and she's like, I'm gonna drive home, and he's like, absolutely not. And when she tries to walk away from him, he grabs her by the back of her.
Furious, like a switch. Like, this is a guy you want to run from, because automatically he's like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, he doesn't even say, I'll take you home. She just starts walking to his car, like, thanks for getting me out of school.
And then
I feel fine.
he grabs her by the collar of her jacket and starts dragging her towards his Volvo.
What's wrong with you? I told you I would get you home safe and sound. Don't you think that's what I'm gonna do? Like, all right, crazy. I'm not going any... Like, Bella, that's when you shrug out of your jacket and run.
Right?
Run.
Because she's
Scream.
like, she's talking about, she's like, oh, I was walking awkwardly sideways. And I'm like, it's a jacket. Slip out of that thing and book it. Like
that is... Why did I think he was attractive? Like,
right.
That is abuse. Like, so I'm dating someone right now. If he ever grabbed the back of my jacket to try to drag me somewhere, I think I'd knock him the F out. I'd hit him. Like, you do not do that to me.
Right. Like, you don't treat a person like that.
That is so disrespectful. You don't treat a person like that. I wouldn't treat a dog like that.
And she even starts bringing up good points. She's like, well, what about my truck? And he's like, my sister will drive it to your house. And she's just like, I don't know any of you people. Like, why would I let your sister drive my truck?
She's fine now. Like, she's recovered and is fine now. There's no reason she shouldn't. Like, I don't know. The thing is, too, if Edward had just been like, you know, I'm concerned about you driving. Is it okay? Like, can I drive you home, please? Because I'm worried about you.
If it had been a conversation.
And I can either pick you up in the morning or I can, you know, have my sister drop it off for you.
Right. And it's just like, it wasn't a conversation. He was just like, no, actually, you're coming into my Volvo whether you want to or not.
This is what we're doing. I am kidnapping you.
And
I know your father is the chief of police, but I'm going to kidnap you.
And it even gets punctuated by the fact that, like, she shows up to the passenger side and she's weighing her options. And she's like, well, I could just run to my car right now. Like, she doesn't say this out loud. She's thinking it. And, like, he knows that she's considering running. And he's like, I would just catch up to you. Like,
yeah, I would just catch up to you and drag you back.
He threatens her.
It's an abusive relationship what they have. It's it's not physically abusive.
It's just controlling.
It's very mentally abusive throughout the whole thing, and that is so clear now. And I don't know why, when I was a teenage girl, I was like, oh my god, I want a relationship like this. Because now, as an adult, I'm like, you want to run as fast as you can away from relationships like this. This is not okay. The way he's treating her, this is not okay at all. This is why, like, girls feel the need to wear whistles or tasers around their necks.
Exactly.
I have a stun gun for guys like Edward.
But she gets into his car and she comments on his music. And I just want to say, this is a man who lived through the Roaring 20s. He lived through 60s funkadelic. This man was alive when jazz was invented. And you're telling me that he's like the height of sophistication and the best music I've ever heard in my life, even though I got to experience jazz music live for the first time in human history. I like Claire de Lune.
Like, why aren't you playing the Beatles or Prince or Queen? Like, put some Bohemian Rhapsody on
just
that.
Anything. Like, get some culture. Listen to Billie Holiday, dude. John Coltrane. Like, you're telling me
Sinatra. I would understand Sinatra.
You're telling me you lived through a century of the world's greatest music and you're just like, actually, classical is the best that I've ever heard. And Bella's just like,
God, they're both so boring. They're
sophisticated.
Both so painfully boring.
Like, I want to make it clear too that, like, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with classical music. I'm just saying, like, the opinion that classical music is somehow at a higher elevation than any other music in history. And I'm like, I guess it makes sense. Well, it's
and
like
I feel bad for saying that because I know that, like, as far as classical music goes, it is.
Like, some people do have a preference for it.
And that's fine.
One of those things. But I'm just like, it's so weird to me that it's like...
Through Elvis, who did things so differently.
Like, you were alive through the invention of most of the modern eras of music that we experience. And this is, like, the early 2000s at this point. So it's like, you don't have to, like, pop music.
The early 2000s had good music, too.
But, like, we don't have to make a point of, like, oh, like, it's okay that you don't like pop music because you're an old man. Like, that's like, a different thing altogether. But to be like, actually, I only listen to classical music.
Also, Bella knows the song. And I'm like, of course she does. And, like... She says it's because of her mother. Her mother, who is a free spirit, who knows how to dance, who does all this crazy stuff. You're telling me she listens to classical music? Bull. I don't believe it.
Well, it's just
Charlie, maybe.
Well, it's just like, I feel like the only reason that it's there and the only reason that we're like, oh yeah, it's classical music specifically, is to punctuate the fact that like she's not like other girls, he's not like other guys.
To me, if a song sends a message, that is sophisticated.
And it's
Like
even like,
Hosier, if you've ever listened to Hosier, his music is like reading poetry. They all say something, they all send a message. It's beautiful. Like you can read it like a poem. That I'm like, all right, that's an artist.
I just feel like, and I'm like, I can't exactly pinpoint why. I think it's a lot of different things, but it's like,
Claire de Lune is
an
interesting choice.
It's an interesting choice, but I think it's like that. It just gets under my skin a little bit. And I think part of it too is like, there's this whole, they get kicked off a reservation. It's almost like there's a racial tension without there being a racial tension. And the idea that classical music is superior to other types of music is a Eurocentric idea. And I think for him to like uphold that value as like a choice by Stephenie Meyer gets under my skin a little bit, because it's like, I don't think that she intentionally meant for it to be like this, where it's like, you're very purposefully, like you're very purposefully making it like, oh, these vampires are ultra sophisticated, they're all silky pale skin, and then like the werewolves are animalistic and monstrous, and one of them natives, and one of them has clawed a woman's face off because he just couldn't control himself. And I think like those two things together is what gets under.
The Cullens are exercising the peak of control.
Right, and I think like if he just liked classical music, that would be one thing, but like within the context of what's going on in the story, I think that's why it gets under my skin more than anything else.
I don't like the way the natives were portrayed in this. I'm not gonna lie.
And we're gonna get to that a little bit.
I'm not a fan of them being
animalistic.
Animals. Because, like, I don't know, you see a lot of art that puts Native Americans with wolves. And that's more cultural. But the way she's portraying them. So, like, it's one thing to have, like, Native Americans with wolves as, like, their ancestry for a book. It's a completely other thing to have Native Americans with wolves that can barely control themselves.
Will it even be one
in a book versus white vampires that are, like, poster child for control.
It's just like, I feel like, and I don't know this for sure, but I feel like just reading up on some of the stuff that I've read about, it's very obvious that Meyer didn't do any research on the actual tribe that lives in La Push, Washington. And I think like that's very telling.
That she even named it after that. Like she didn't make up a tribe name, she used their tribe. It's just clear that she didn't do her research, and I feel like if you were going to use a Native American tribe, either do the research or make one up. She could have made up her own.
Yeah, she could have made up her own.
Reservation.
She could have made werewolves completely separate from natives. Like, you know, it's as easy as that. I digress.
Well, that's another thing. Like, the prejudice between the Cullens and the Quayu, I guess. There is clear prejudice between them.
And the way to counteract that is to humanize Native American people, which is the exact opposite of what Stephenie Meyer did.
I want to make it clear, I don't hate Stephenie Meyer.
No.
I don't, like, have a personal vendetta against her. I don't know her at all personally. She could be great. She could be awful. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I'm here to talk about her book.
Exactly. But, okay, so after the music debacle,
which is stupid.
Yeah. Edward drives her home. They have another kind of non-conversation where, like, she talks about Renee and Phil a little bit more, and then she tries to ask him about his family, and he still will not tell her anything. And it's like, dude, you've gone past the point at which you're like, oh, I'm gonna try to hide who I am from you, even though I've shown you that I have superhuman speed multiple times, and at the lunch table earlier today, I heavily implied that I knew exactly what everybody was thinking.
Also, it's just like, you can't, I don't know, for me, if I were Bella sitting there, you can't ask me all of these personal questions about my mom and my dad and my stepfather, and I get nothing from you in return. That is not how this works. But of course, Bella's very not like me.
She's obsessed, so she's like, okay.
I guess I'll just tell you whatever you want.
And
want my deepest, darkest secret? Sure, Edward. I killed someone in ninth
grade.
grade.
It's yours.
Just kidding.
But she ends up she goes to sleep at one point, I think because she's still feeling not very good, and she keeps checking for her truck, and she's like, oh, it needs to get back here before Charlie gets back, otherwise he'll have questions. And then one time she looks out the window and it's just there. And that's another thing where I'm just like, why wouldn't Alice knock on the door and be like, hey, brought your truck back, here are your keys?
Or even just her, she always talks about her truck being so loud, and she even says, I thought it would be loud enough that I would hear it because my truck is so old and loud. And I'm like, so somehow Alice driving it makes the truck quieter because Alice is quiet, natural. Like, I don't think so.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's stupid.
And before we get off this chapter, I do want to mention, so before Edward ditches Mike completely, Mike does actually mention to Bella, he like wants to make it very clear in front of Edward that they're going to the beach this weekend because it's going to be a nice day, and Edward is not invited. And Bella tries to invite him later, but he's like, no, actually,
I don't think I was invited.
He's like, I don't think I was invited, and I'm going hiking with Emmett. And she does ask her dad that night, like, about the place that he says that he's going.
It's like Goat Rocks.
Something like that. And her dad's like, that's a really dangerous place to hike. And
she's lots of bears.
Okay.
People go there during hunting season.
And she's like, oh, okay, cool. I guess I misheard the name or whatever. But that leads us into chapter 6, Scary Stories, which is mostly about them going to the beach. Not a lot happens in this chapter.
Bella's friend Lauren is awful.
Bella's friend Lauren is like very catty towards her all of a sudden. And I think it's partially
to do with her sitting with Edward at lunch,
yes.
But we're not exactly sure why. Because Lauren is now going to the dance with Eric or Tyler.
One of the two, yeah. She's all of a sudden very catty, and then Bella meets up with everybody in front of Mike's parents' shop, and they all kind of exclude her except for Mike. And I'm like, that's really...
Which is really weird, because, like, two of the guys were super into her. Jessica was a pretty good friend for her. Which, Jessica doesn't outright exclude her. She's just very into Mike at the moment. Like, he is her main concern.
Yes, exactly. And so she's like, oh, I'm not having a very good time, but I guess I'm going to the beach with these guys.
Yeah, these awful people. Like, part of me is like, okay, so there's a lot of fault on Bella, because a lot of people will say, like, oh yeah, she completely just ditched and forgot about all of her friends. And I'm like, that's true, and that does suck. But at the same time, all of her friends weren't great friends, and the friends that were good friends to her, it was because they wanted something from her. Like, all of the guys wanted something from her. They wanted to date her.
Right. And I feel like the novelty of her being the new kid had kind of worn off at this point, and people
they realized how dull she was.
Yeah, people who weren't very big fans of her were kind of realizing that they're like, oh, I don't really care if I'm friends with this person or not.
Like Jessica.
Yeah.
Who Bella really never made an effort with.
Exactly. Like, Bella never really made an effort with anybody. She's like, I just want to get through this. And it's like, girl, okay. All right. You don't want to make connections at all?
I hate her.
So they end up going to the beach. They go to La Push, and what is the beach called? First Beach?
First Beach.
Yeah. They end up going to First Beach, which is in La Push. It's part of, like, the Native American reservation there. And they're all going to have a grand old time. End up sitting with, like, in this group of petrified wood. There is a big deal that gets made out of, like, burning driftwood. Mike tries to impress Bella with that. And it's like, at this point, Mike, you're with Jessica right now. Like, I know that you like Bella and all that.
He's not with Jessica. He's not, like, committed to dating her, but he is going to a dance with her. So it's just kind of rude to be like, oh yeah, I accepted the invitation to go to the dance with you, even though you clearly weren't my first option, and you definitely know it, because I said maybe first.
And now I'm gonna try my hardest to impress Bella at every turn, even
in
though
front of you.
Yeah, you're also here, but I'm gonna ignore you.
It's really crummy.
But they go to the tide pools. Bella makes a big point about how she's not gonna get in, or she's not gonna stand up and walk around because she's too clumsy to do that. So she sits down, and she thinks a little bit about, like, how she's been there before with her dad and how she really liked it.
Yeah, she said she used to fall into the tide pools.
And that part, at least, like, the part about, like, remembering stuff about her dad, I did think was pretty sweet, where it's like,
I like
the nostalgia of it. But they end up going back. She doesn't talk to anybody while she's at the tide pool. She just kind of looks in, and she's like, oh, a starfish, cool. And then they are, like, walking back through the woods.
The whole reason she ends up, so, like, half the group stays in the parking lot or wherever they were.
They're on the beach
on the beach. They stay there, and the other half decides to go to the tide pools. And her deciding factor is Lauren, who has just been a monster to her on this trip for no reason, like talking crap about her and stuff, decides to stay. And the other two guys who asked her to the dance decide to stay, and that's her deciding factor of I'm gonna go hike to the tide pools to get away from these people.
She's like, I'm gonna go by whoever I dislike the least at this point.
Yeah.
This is like, all right, girl. Honestly, I mean,
that's
I get
fair.
it. But as they're coming back from the tide pool, she realizes that more people have shown up, and she doesn't really recognize any of them, but she sort of walks over. They get introduced to her, and at the mention of her name, one of the boys that's there, one of the new boys, perks up, and she's like, oh, who is that? Like, I don't know who that is. Should I know him? In her own thoughts. And it's a bunch of kids from the Native American reservation who have come down to join the group. One of them being Jacob Black.
Who we will learn to love, I guess.
Yeah.
I like him so far.
Yeah,
He's
I've been warming up to him so far. I like
him better than Edward so far.
Yes. Like, when both of us, when we were in middle school, we were staunchly Team Edward. And so I feel like we both fell into this trap of, like, not really caring what was going on in any of Jacob's scenes. But I think now in our read-through, we're going to be a lot more interested in Jacob's side. Because in this, like, he's very nice to her, and he's very sweet. Like, I don't know how he's going to be in the future once he actually gets a little bit less naive. But as far as it goes right now, I really like him.
He's okay. Yeah.
But so he actually approaches her after the introductions, and she's kind of sitting by herself at this point, and he comes over and he's like, oh, you bought my dad's truck. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's where I know you from. But she really only knows his older sisters, who never come up again, really.
Yeah, Rachel and Rebecca. They're twins. One of them is married and moved to Hawaii.
One of them's
the other
college.
Went to college and just never comes back, I guess, because I don't think
like they never really come up again. No, and so I'm just like
I
they're
don't
just
know why
there.
they bothered giving him siblings.
They're just there for the flavor. Like, I don't know. They make small talk because she doesn't really remember Jacob at all. But he obviously
he's 2 years younger than her.
Yes. And she's like, oh, okay, I'm not really interested in talking to you. Until Lauren has to pipe in with her big mouth. And she's like, oh, aren't you so sad that Edward Cullen couldn't come? Like, she's trying to tease Bella without teasing her. And then Sam, one of the other kids who came from the reservation, is like, oh, the Cullens can't come here. But he kind of leaves it at that.
I think he says, like, kind of aggressively, the Cullens don't come here.
Yeah, like to shut the conversation
They don't come
down.
Here at all, ever. And, like, Bella kind of, like, everyone else is just like, okay. And Bella is kind of like, they don't come here, like, they're not allowed. Like, that's kind of a weird statement to say. Not like, oh, I don't think they like the beach. Oh, I've never seen them here. Just, they don't come here.
Yeah, they can't come here. But that kind of clicks in her head, and she's like, oh, Jacob probably knows stuff about that. So I'm gonna pretend to flirt with him to get information out of him. Which I'm like,
Jacob was already super nice to you, so if you had just asked and, like, not toyed with his emotions, he probably still would have given you the same information.
Right, like, he's a nice enough kid. But she's like, oh, come take a walk with me, Jacob. And in her mind, she's like, I'm trying to imitate everything that Edward did to me that made me have a crush on him. So I hope that works on Jacob. And to be fair, it does. But I'm just like, girl, why are you comparing everything to Edward right now? Like, you are with a whole different group of people.
Because she is obsessed. It's not healthy.
It's not. But they go out more towards like the ocean. She's like, so, like, what's up with that? And Jacob makes it very clear. He's like, oh, like, I don't really believe in any of this stuff, but it's kind of an old legend.
At this point, he's just a kid listening to his dad tell stories.
Exactly. And he starts in on this legend about the cold ones. And that's, like, the big draw for Bella is the cold ones. And he basically says, at one point in time, the cold ones came, and they were, like, a group of people who were really hostile. And the reservation, the tribe, made a deal with them to, like, if they were, like,
there are some that are different. Like, they claimed that they didn't have to hurt people or hunt people. So because they weren't a threat to the tribe, we made a treaty that just they can't come on our land.
Yeah. She's like, oh, so how are the Cullens related to the cold ones? Like, are they related to them or what? He goes, they are them. He's
They're
like,
the same ones that my great-grandfather made the treaty with. Carlisle, specifically.
And it's like, they don't change
their
names.
There are two new ones,
like,
but
they left and came back, and they didn't change their names.
Yeah, he's like,
how smart.
He's like, oh yeah, like, the whole tribe knows the name Carlisle. That's the one that we made the treaty with, and his clan. And he's like, but there are two new ones, a boy and a girl, which is Rosalie and Jasper.
Yes. And it's just very very interesting that it's like, for as smart as Carlisle Cullen supposedly is, he's a doctor, he's like controlling this group of people as a family, he's like leading them into high vampire society where they don't have to feed from people, and yet he
doesn't think to change their
like,
names, and they come back to the same town every how many years? Like, you have the whole world that you could be living in, and he comes back to the same place periodically, while the same generation is possibly still alive, because like there are people our age whose great grandparents are still alive. We are older than Jacob.
And so it's like, this just in, Carlisle is dumb. But Jacob finishes telling his story because he doesn't really go too far into it. He makes it very clear that he's like, I don't really put a lot of stock into this, but this is just like the old legends. And
he tells her that his tribe is supposedly descended from wolves, and that like there's the belief that like, so the way he says it is interesting, and it's, oh yeah, you know, wolves that turn to men, not men that turn into wolves. They're wolves and they turn to men. He talks about how, like, she asks specifically what the cold ones are, and he tells her blood drinkers.
Yeah. And he makes a big thing. He's like, oh, don't tell anybody I told you this, because your dad is actually really upset that we don't trust the Cullens.
Because
and
people on the reservation
people on the reservation won't go to the hospital. And so I'm not really supposed to be talking about it because nobody outside of the reservation really puts any stock into this, and they're really mad at us for not liking the Cullens.
And he's like, and I basically just broke like this said treaty by telling you what they are, because that was part of it.
Yes. So he's like, ha ha ha, isn't that crazy? And she's like, oh my god, Jacob, like, that's so weird. Because she's still pretending to flirt with him, and he's like, oh yeah, like,
which is belittling, and I don't like that. I don't like Stephenie Meyer's writing. I'm sorry. I don't.
Through the whole conversation, too, he's, like, very interested in talking about how he likes to build cars, and how he's, like, he's 15, but he's about to get his learner's permit, so he wants to learn how to drive, and maybe they can see each other, and blah, blah, blah. But he's, like, very interested in, like, just, like, talking about, like, oh yeah, like, I really like to build cars, and, you know, I'm trying to...
He's interesting. I don't know anyone that builds cars from scratch.
Right, like, he's just, like, he's, like, a very normal kid, and she's like, oh, the only way to get anybody to want anything from me who is a man is to flirt with them. And it's just, like, I don't understand, like, why...
That's a huge deal at that age.
Right, like, I don't understand why the relationship between you and guys always has to be, like, they're either romantically interested in you, or they hate you. Like, those are the two options in Bella's mind. In Bella's mind is what it seems like. And I'm just like, I don't know.
Anyone's romantically interested in this girl.
I don't know how she has guys all over her. But they kind of get interrupted at the point where Jacob, like, kind of stops telling her the story, and she's, like, thinking about it, and she's like, oh, like, that's really weird. Maybe I'll ask Edward about it. But I think Mike and Jessica come up at that point, and Mike's like, hey, we're gonna get ready to go because it's about to rain. And she's like, okay, bye, Jacob. Like, she is totally
and
cool.
Jacob definitely can tell that, like, Mike likes her, and definitely kind of taunts him, like, oh yeah, like, if I ever, you know, when I get my license, I can drive to Forks. And she's like, you should definitely come visit me. And he's like, oh, okay, I will. And then because Mike's there, and he can tell that Mike is hating that Bella's talking to another guy, he's just like, it was nice to see you again, Bella, because like, they have family history, which is hilarious to me, that this 15-year-old kid is showing up, this like 17 or 18-year-old kid.
It's like this 15-year-old thinks he's got game.
He does. He has more game than all the other guys. I don't know.
But
what
at
Bella
the same
sees in
time,
these other people.
at the same time, it's like he doesn't really have game, because the only reason that Bella is even remotely interested in him is because she's pretending to flirt with him so she can get information from him,
which is so crummy.
And so yeah, they drive back. She's talking about how, like, she has the opportunity to think on the drive back, and she's very curious about all that stuff, but that's kind of all that happens. I feel like
you get a lot of information in this chapter, but not a lot happens, if that makes sense.
Like, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of lore. I think this is where, like, world building comes into context, because, like, it's very info dumpy without being info dumpy because of, like, the way that it's being presented. But it ultimately not a lot happens, because it's just like Jacob's like, oh yeah, like the cold
Here's
ones.
the entire secrets of my tribe very quickly laid out on a platter without you putting any effort in or getting to know me at all. Which honestly is kind of like a teenage boy, but
I mean,
also
true.
like I feel like not a lot of teenage boys are really like, to impress this girl, I'll tell her these weird
Everything.
stories that I'm supposed to believe are real.
Like, it's just very, I don't know. I feel like, as far as Jacob goes, I feel like I'm okay with him right now. I know he comes in a little bit later in the book and, like, provides more, like, ancillary sort of information to her, and then they become actual friends at some point.
Yeah.
But this, as far as it goes, I'm interested in him, but I feel like this is a very poor way to introduce him.
Yeah.
Because it also does very poorly at setting up
Also-
that he is the other main love interest. Because it's just like, she's just like, oh, well, here's just this guy that he's going to give all the information I need about
She
Edward.
calls him beautiful.
And like,
I'm also just like, okay, so her family has known the Blacks family forever. And she hung out with Jacob's two older sisters, who were only 2 years older than Jacob. So realistically, Jacob would have been of age to do whatever they were doing. Like,
Yes.
2 years when you're really young is a big difference, but as you get a little bit older, it's not that big of a difference. So how do you not remember Jacob at all?
right. She's just like, oh,
Like,
he
I
just
feel like
wasn't
she
even
should
on
have
my
remembered
radar.
him. Especially because he remembered her. Like, she definitely should have remembered him. Even
And
if she
from her
didn't
memory-
recognize him as soon as he was like, oh yeah, I'm Jacob Black. She should have been like, oh, no kidding, you look different. Like, she should have remembered who he was. That's bull to me.
And from her memory, too, she's talking about how, like, as far as Rachel and Rebecca went, she didn't really get along with them. But she still remembers
They were
them.
all so shy that they never spoke. And I'm like, that's, like, not how childhood works.
No. But she's
Especially
talking...
at that age.
She was talking about how, like, she didn't really get along with them very well just because they were all so shy. And so it would make sense to reason and be like, oh, like, I knew their little brother because whenever I got shoved in with them, I would have probably also been
He
hanging
wasn't
out.
shy.
Yeah, like, I probably also would have been hanging out with him. Like, I don't know. It feels very weird that they were just, like, completely separated. And she's like, I don't... This dude could have been not alive for all I knew.
So you're saying Billy Black's wife's dead, and he'll take 2 kids fishing and leaves the other at home by himself, the youngest.
Yeah, like,
I don't think so.
But yeah, so that's sort of what we got out of these 3 chapters. It's one of those things where, like, one chapter, a lot of stuff happens, and the other 2, not a lot of stuff happens, just like the last 3 chapters. Overall, I would say, like, I think it's picking up a little bit more. I think the story is getting faster, despite, like, they're still kind of getting through just, like, the exposition part of it. But I definitely think it's picking up a little bit, at least.
If you had to rate these chapters on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate them?
Like a 5.
Really?
Yeah.
I give them like a 3.
Oh,
4.
yeah?
I just don't like Bella is very whiny. She's very dramatic. Edward is very mood swingy, and I do not like people like that. Like,
Yeah.
I myself, whenever I meet people like that, I avoid them. So I'm having a very, like, it's laughable, but it's also really frustrating, and it's really hard to get through for me at some points.
For me, at least, like, I'm not a huge fan of the way that Bella's acting, but I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of, like, I really liked Bella and related to Bella when I was in middle school, and she's definitely acting immature for a 17-year-old, but I'm trying to think about, like, how accurate she is to being, like, a teenager, and I'm like, okay, I guess it stands to reason that, like, teenagers sometimes act kind of wild, and so at least on that part, I'm trying not to, like, judge her too harshly just because I don't personally like her, but I still don't think that she's written very well.
I don't think she's written well at all. I think this book had so much potential. Like, I really do. The
Yeah.
whole series, the whole concept of it, I think it had a lot of potential. And she just managed to get every character wrong.
It's very unfortunate, really. I don't know. And I feel like I'm hoping that Alice comes in soon because I'm excited to see.
I remember I liked Alice a
Yeah,
lot.
that's the thing, is, like, I remember I liked Alice a lot, and so I'm really interested to see if, like, I still do like her as much as I used to, because to me she was, like, the coolest character, but I don't know.
She was, and she was sweet and just relaxed. And
Yes. It was just easy with her. And I'm like, okay.
I wonder if it's going to be the same.
Yes.
Or if I'm going to think she's creepy, too.
Maybe.
Because so far, I think the Cullens are creepy,
Well,
man.
I feel like
don't
I
know.
didn't-
I would have booked it in the opposite direction of this family.
Well, I feel like I didn't pick up on it as much when I was, like, the age we were when we first read it. But now I'm like, oh, Edward speaks really cryptically for no reason. And I'm sort of afraid that Alice is going to be like that too, especially because a lot of like her power deals with seeing the future. And so I'm just afraid that she's going to like kind of be the same way. But I'm hoping that she ends up being like as cool as I remember her being.
I need one character to root for.
I do remember from the movie the one scene where she puts her leg up above her head while she's pitching the baseball, and I like that scene. So here's hoping they're all like that. That's all I really remember.
I think that's all we have to say for tonight.
I think that's all we have for tonight. Hey guys, Jay jumping in here again. Just wanted to say, if you enjoyed what you heard today, or if you're interested in hearing more from us, please feel free to follow us if you can, wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, as well as on Instagram and Twitter at redflagsatp. Thank you so much. But we hope that you enjoyed. If you're interested, tune in with us next time. Bye!
Bye.